And here we are, a little bit of a different view today, but we are back with Data Day with Dean Crook and Jeff Dickinson. So today we are going to sit down and we are going to look at good old trucking in Australia.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Oh boy, here we go, Dean. I can't wait to. So for y'all, we're gonna have to set this up because Jeff and I were just giggling off air here. So Dean's gone over to Australia to enjoy a couple of weeks off, and he took a trip to go. What was it? A load of chocolate milk that you went and rode around with?
Yep. And then we put yogurt on the return haul. So
there you go.
Refrigerated truck.
Yeah. No matter what, trucking don't stop for the Diener. I tell you that right now. He's always going. Whether it's Grumpy Pete in the U.S. or it's a massive truck. Massive. Look at the height.
Dean, I gotta ask you this question. Dean, I have to ask you this question. Are you hauling for your company that you used to work for before you came to the States, or what?
No. This was a friend of mine that owns that truck, and he hauls for another guy that I know, but no, not the same company. This is Jeff's frozen. This is mostly
no. Jeff in the U.S. did not freeze.
He did.
That never
happened. Man. Come on, Dean. You're in McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts. Come on.
No.
It doesn't matter. His internet's not freezing.
Yeah.
It
was.
I don't know.
Jeff, I did mostly produce. So this is a freezer van, not a produce chiller van. This will hold down to minus 32 centigrade without any problem. So we were just hauling milk and yogurt bi-directionally. But the thing this is going to sound really strange, but this was a bucket list of mine, was to drive a T909 Kenworth, which is the biggest Kenworth they make, arguably on the planet. And when I say biggest, not necessarily horsepower, but biggest in terms of height, because it's a conventional, as you can see from that picture we just flashed up. I think you did. It stands about 2 feet taller than my Peterbilt because of the size of the radiator. And it's principally the fan on this thing is probably 50% bigger than the fan on my Caterpillar, but it's to pull air in because all of the air intake tubing sits much higher above the engine. And it's got more coolant, so you need more plumbing around the engine and a bigger fan to pull more air in to keep the thing cool because of the extreme heat. So the trucks in Australia sit about 1.5 feet higher off the chassis to get airflow moving and to accommodate all of the plumbing that goes on around the engine to keep them cooler. Plus, they're hauling about 30% more weight per linear foot of trailer length. So,
wow.
So
come on, Dean. You also have a huge ass bumper to take out those kangaroos that come out in front of you, because that thing's up high.
You're almost like in a monster truck when you get in it. Like it must feel like you're that high off the ground in a monster truck, and
it does.
So, did you jump in your car after?
And it was strange. It was my brother's little Mazda RX-6, and it's like this high off the ground.
You're going from 2 inches off, from 3 feet to 2 inches off the ground.
You should try this experience. You're going from sitting like maybe 15 feet in the air, probably not quite that, but you're close. And then you jump in this little car and you're driving along, and you want to. My instinct was to go and grab gears every time I come to a hill in the car, like I'm grabbing for the shifter, and there's nothing there.
Shape brake. Hey, it's no noise.
Not in an MX-6, not in the Mazda. That's not happening.
So the other thing you'll when I post some videos on it is they have a lot of point-to-point cameras measuring average road speed for cars and trucks. So you rarely see a policeman out on the roads, because they're measuring you from A to B. That could be 300 miles apart, but they're measuring your road speed between points. So if you're speeding, they send you a fine in the mail. So it's a really interesting deployment of resources. But on the heavy truck side, they have a thing called Safety Cam, which is measuring truck speed and hours of service between camera sites. It's a massive overhead gantry above the interstates all across the country now. I was one of the early helpers of building that in '97 when I was at the ATA. But essentially now trucks are speed limited to 62 miles an hour. You can probably run to 65 with a little bit
To
of
the floor.
tolerance. So everything's slowed right down here now, and it's very interesting. It's a much more calmer industry. Everyone's doing consistent speeds, but you still have paper logs, but the cameras are auditing your times, right? Because when you fill in your logbook, you've got to put in your location and the odometer reading of the truck. So when the camera goes back and looks at it, if you're too quick between camera sites, or you haven't stopped for your mandatory 15-minute break, that you'll get a please explain in the mail. And so from an enforcement point of view, it's a fascinating way to use very few resources, but use technology to get a much bigger safety outcome.
Let me ask you this. Like in Nevada, right? There's certain stretches of the road out there that you can crank out 85 miles an hour, you know? Do they have that out in the Outback out there in Australia or anything like that?
Yeah, in the Northern Territory, you can run to, it's 100 and 110. So the answer is no. For heavy trucks, everything is speed limited right down. At most, you could do maybe 70 in the Outback at the most. Now, the more trailers you put on, the slower you are governed. So you can only run 55 miles an hour if you've got 3 or 4 trailers on. Now, that doesn't mean they don't run a little bit quicker and tweak things. I can't give too much away on air, but there's a way.
Like Diener.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Heavily regulated. But a lot of the speed cameras, I think this is an interesting point, Jeff. A lot of the speed cameras are placed in strategic places to catch people. It's not necessarily about safety because it's not linear speed. So you talk about Nevada. It's not linear speed that's the problem. It's inappropriate speed for the conditions. So your top end speed is fine in the middle of nowhere, like in Nevada, as it would be in the Outback here. The problem that truckers have got is the amount of weight and the heat. Speed will be your enemy because you'll blow tires off every rim on the trailer if you run too quick. So this is an interesting country from a freight perspective. You've actually got to take things reasonably slowly. On our trip back from Melbourne, we had a slow leak. I went round and hit the tires with a baseball bat. You've got 22 wheels and 9 axles, and 6 axles on this truck because we didn't have the front trailer on. And I heard you have this dreaded feeling of when you hit them with the baseball bat, you hear a thud, which means it's flat. Because you never want to have to change a tire. And the previous week, he'd picked up a couple of bits of steel, ruined 2 steer tires. That was $1,000. And then I picked up the thud in the tire and I said, I think we've got a slow leak here. We couldn't fill it. So we took it to a repair shop, lost a couple of hours, but it was a crack in the rim. The rim was cracked from where the steel had come off the interstate highway and hit the tire in between the tires.
Right.
So my point, the point was, I put this in an Instagram post, is there's always something going wrong in trucking, but you have to watch everything.
Let me ask you this, because you've driven in both countries. Yep. What rules and regulations would you want to see that is in place in Australia done in the US?
Right. The number one would be
let's change that to North America. Okay, it's not just all the US, Jeff. Trucks come to Canada. We don't switch to ice machines.
Okay, Canada. Okay, Canada. US.
Hours of service, Jeff. Hours of service by far. I hosted the ATA in '97 and Transport Canada. Elements of Australia's world-class leading fatigue management program made it into the 2004 hours of service revision with the FMCSA. Canada adopted most of it, and it was the shift from 10 on 8 off to 11, 3 and 10, which gets you closer to the 24-hour rising and setting of the sun and the sleep-wake cycle. Because we'd pioneered that in the 90s. We'd built performance-based regulations, and we took the prescriptive 24-hour wrap around a driver and made it on the weekly or the fortnightly number of hours. So instead of 72 hours in a week, you get 144 hours in a fortnight. Some days you work more, some days you work less. But here the principal difference is you can work 14 hours a day, right? So you can drive 14. You can drive 14. Yep. But if you do that, you can't do it again the next day. You've got to cut back your hours. And if you bump up on these, pardon?
What's that? If you drive 14 like on a Monday, what can you drive on a Tuesday?
Maybe 13. It's got to be you've got to back it off. But the more you bump your outer limits, the more night sleep opportunities you've got to put into the 7-day week. So we built this around science. Yeah. Yep. So and we need 6 hours continuous every 24. It's moved to 7 hours now, which is a bit of a waste because 4 sleep cycles is 6 hours. But the difference here, Jeff, is you can take those 6 hours whenever you want. Like there's elements of, I've been advocating for flexibility in the ELD mandate where you can put the hours together however you want. Drive 4, sleep 6, drive 1, sleep 1. But at the end of the day, it's 11, 3, and 10. It all adds up to 24. That would be the one thing I would want for drivers with ELDs is it's not the amount of hours, it's when it occurs. It's when sleep and work occurs in the 24. That's what drives your safety outcome and your productivity, not the numerical value. So the other thing,
it's kind of like the individual. If they only need 3-4 hours, they can sleep 3-4 hours, and they can split sleeper berth and all that kind of stuff.
But it also maps. It also follows the flow of freight. As you guys know, like things are, busy unloading on a Monday, but there might not be a whole lot of loads out on Monday. You might get held over to Tuesday. And then by Wednesday, everyone's pumping. And then towards the end of the week, things tail off. So it allows you to work when the freight is there, as opposed to this sort of prescriptive approach, which tries to, the US problem is they design regulations for the lowest common denominator, the worst of the worst. Whereas 90% of the carriers actually probably don't even need any regulation because they're very well run and it's inherently safe. So they design regulations for people that, to be honest, there's always 10% of the industry that are always going to be pushing the boundaries, and they need some sort of, regulations around them. But that's never changed. More ELD mandates or less won't change that. That's just how they are.
They're just going to find ways to hack the computer.
Yeah, there's a lot of imbalance. To your point, now in Australia, companies aren't open on the weekends, right? On Saturday and Sunday?
Mostly, yes, correct. Most of them aren't. Some are 24/7 though.
Yeah, so the thing is when you're trying to balance out your inventory and shippers are trying to get that inventory out, like you said, slow on a Monday, everybody's fast and hard and heavy on a Tuesday, so forth and so on, right? But when you think about the delivery and managing your assets correctly, right? You don't want to land on a Saturday or Sunday because now your truck is being held up for another 24, 48 hours. So you want to avoid that. So it might be heavy on one day, whatever. So do you find that imbalance is like the same in Australia as it is in North America, Japan?
It's not as bad. It's not as bad, Jeff. It's not as pronounced because the freight task is condensed into 4 capital cities on the eastern seaboard. So 80% of the population lives in 3% of the landmass on the eastern coast. So you can do 4,000 miles a week here in your allotted hours, 4,000 miles a week. Like just digest that, because in the US, if you got 2,500 to 3,000 out of a truck, you'd be happy. They're running 4,000 miles a week. They're getting 54 cents a kilometer. So you're running 6,000 kilometers at 54 cents a kilometer. It's a well-paid job here, but you are working your ass off. But here's the thing: most of the drivers are on a 5 and 2. 5 days on, you bump up on your 70 hours really quickly. 5/14s are 72, if my math is right, and then you got to have 2 days off. So you work a 5 and 2, and the problem is if those 5 nights, those 14-hour nights, 14-hour shifts were all at night, all the dark hours, you're absolutely hammered by the time you get home, and it takes a couple of days to get your head back together again, and then you've got to go again. So it's a hard job, but it's a highly paid job, and it's fairly remote. So you've got to know a lot. You've got to be a different driver. You've got to be more than a steerer, and because you've got to watch stuff like cracked rims and tires that sound different. Because if you've got a load on that's, a $600,000 load of something, and it's, a freezer van, and it's 110 outside, you want to make sure you know how fridge motors work. You want to know how to keep a refrigeration load under control. So there's just lots to go on, and I that's the one thing that is different. There's a higher level of professionalism here, not by a whole lot, because we've got the same demographic cohorts in the US as we have here. A lot of the older guys are moving out of the industry. There's a new generation that's coming in that's more, gamified. They're not necessarily professional truckers, but they love technology. And it's similar. There's lots of similarities, but you don't necessarily get held over too much on weekends.
Now, here's the most important question of everything that we discussed here. Is it mandatory in Australia to do pre-checks and post-checks on what you just said about flat tires, cracked rims, all this? How important is it?
So there's no emphasis, because the standard of drivers is so much higher. There's no regulatory mandate like this, because it's
like you want to make sure your shit's tight.
It's
what I'm saying. I mean,
so it's survival. Like this is about survival because if you don't check your truck and check everything, you want to bet, as the picture behind me, you're going to be broke down there in the middle of nowhere, and there'll be snakes and all sorts of they'll come and get you eventually and take you off into the scrub.
It's funny. I was driving to grocery store. Wasn't last night. It was the night before. Right. And I won't name the name, but this trucking company, I drive right by their yard. And this guy pulls out right behind me. Headlight out. No turn, like the turn signal on his truck's not working, but you can see the turn signal at the back of the trailer working. So his turn signal's not working. He's pulling out of his yard.
Ooh.
And in my head, I'm going, you didn't even attempt a pre-trip. Like you didn't even start the truck and then get out and even do a walk around. So how do you know you have all good tires? How do you know your brakes aren't seized? How do you know, like, I guess your airlines work because the trailer's moving, but like I'm sitting there thinking like, and it's a running light. It wasn't even like it was a headlight. Like, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, how do you, there's a security guard sitting right at the exit. Okay. So this truck's moving towards him, no flasher on. When the truck turns, I see the guy look and he can see the flat. Doesn't say a word, not his problem. And this guy's just going down the road and he pulls up right beside me and I roll down my window and I'm trying to get his attention, but the height difference, I just couldn't get his attention. I'm sitting there thinking, my Lord, this is what a professional truck driver is supposed to look like. Like you couldn't even start your truck and walk around it. Never mind hitting the tires with a hammer. Just walk around it and see that your lights aren't working, your turn signals aren't working. Like, I don't know.
Then there's a whole lot of drivers that don't do it. To Jeff's point, don't do it, don't know how to do it, even though your license requires you to know the basics. But you've got to know what you're looking for. You know, you've got to know the difference between coolant water and oil on the ground as you come back from grabbing a cup of coffee, right? You've got to know that a flat tire appears darker than every other tire when you look at your tires as you're walking back from getting a cup of coffee. So they're not necessarily trained. So part of this is training. It could also be that their 7-way pin, you know, was a bit loose and it's shorting out. That can cause damages when you jackknife. But in the States, it's like, I'll just call someone. But here it's like Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call? Like,
and you're out in the middle of nowhere, and now you start getting, you know, if it's nighttime, you're probably not going to see anyone until the morning, and you know,
forces the standard higher.
That's the thing that really upsets me more than anything else. I mean, most of these drivers has families. They have young kids, right? A lot of them are aged and they're getting out of the business. But the next generation, they're younger. Wouldn't you think, hey, you know what? I have a family to support. I'm going out there. I might be jeopardizing the public out there on the highways because of my negligence of not checking out my trailer where I could blow a freaking tire because I don't know it and go through a windshield, kill a little kid or a driver, could kill a whole family. You know,
well, Jeff, I don't know if you remember, like 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago in Ontario. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but like literally a truck lost a dolly leg. Like lost the entire leg off their landing gear. It went through a vehicle, killed somebody on the 400 series highways. Nobody ever came forward. They never figured it out. And I say, when you went to wherever you were going to drop that truck, you knew you knew a leg was missing. You knew it. And it's these types of things, and it's crazy. But you know what, Dean? I agree with your point. I'll just call somebody. Right?
Well,
I have a headlight out. I get pulled over by DOT or MTO in Ontario, and I'll just call my guy on the side of the road. I'll get to sit there for 2 hours, and somebody will.
So we've kind of trailer. It's like washing your trailer in the bad weather to look for frame cracks down the trailer or something like that. I mean, if it's straight, you're not going to notice. But how many guys literally sit there and power wash to notice any cracks? I mean, these things were carrying, I mean, it's 80,000 pounds on a freaking road, 44 in the trailer. You know, it's taking a lot of punishment. Why don't they look at these simple things? It's simple, right?
It's simple. I think this is a whole other show in itself.
I know. I would just go on and on because it's stupidity. It just drives me nuts.
So part of this, guys, is so what? It's like a chicken or the egg situation. What came first? Drivers that lack skills, or the technology we needed to keep them safe? So if you think about automatic transmissions, lane departure technology, adaptive cruise, what that's created is this vacuum for drivers to sit in where you don't need the survival skills that I needed 40 years ago. It's a safety net that you put around drivers. And part of me thinks that we design technology and highway infrastructure and call centers and wrecker companies that are at every exit, and repairers, the national repairer network to fix tires. Part of it is, as we've evolved, we create this network around drivers where they don't really need to do a whole lot of stuff on their own. So part of me thinks, is it the infrastructure around the drivers that's allowed them to de-skill, or is it that they've been de-skilling, so we've built the technology to accommodate it? And I can never figure out which. It's probably a bit of both. But
probably, I'm leaning more towards the latter than to be honest with you. But
yeah,
hey, so,
I'm with you.
Okay, guys.
We'd end up
we're like 20 minutes in here.
Yeah, let's talk business.
Okay, well, no. So I've got a couple of questions because I don't know if it's out yet, but I know leading up to this weekend, Super Bowl weekend, the largest weekend for avocados, right?
Yep.
Is it, yes. Okay.
It'll
and
be
I'm assuming
now.
chicken wings as well.
Beer. I haven't looked at
beer.
Beer. And
yeah.
It's also a big week for Valentine's Day flowers out of Miami. Freight rates are going up.
That's true.
North.
Yeah.
True.
They're not setting the world on fire, but they will be about 20 cents a mile lower than last year. So
your
rates
world
are rising.
will be on fire if you don't get your wife freaking flowers.
Yep.
Good call, Jeffrey. Good call.
Yeah, we're going to be we'll be spending Valentine's Day in a plane and coming across the Pacific, heading back home. So we'll be sitting right next to each other.
At least you'll be close together. That's fine.
There you go.
There's nowhere she can go. She has to put up with you.
My ribs will be sore from being elbowed.
No,
Gene, my wife and I are spending Valentine's Day morning going to the hospital for a scan, for a CT scan for me. So I get it. Like my wife was saying, she's like, great. So Valentine's Day, we get to go to Princess Margaret Hospital. I'm like, oh, yay, we get another date to the hospital. Because we only did that for however many weeks every day in a row. That was so much fun. But yeah, so I mean, it's, but we'll be done in the morning. But so you're actually on your way back next week.
Next Tuesday, we leave Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. and land in Los Angeles Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. We cross the international date line and we save a day coming home, whereas we lost a day coming here.
So so let me ask you, when you land, is it actually the 14th or is it the 13th still?
Well, it'll be the 13th, I think. We leave here on the 14th. We leave here on the 13th.
And then you land here on the 13th.
Day.
I'm telling you, there's got to be some way to figure out that Powerball shit. Like, I don't know, man. You know what I'm saying? It's got to be something.
Well, it reminds me, I've spent $200 on Powerball here. I've got to go and see if I won anything, because I might not be coming back.
Yeah, hey, Dan, that's right. Because if they call the numbers and you know what the numbers is, but you can't make a phone call.
I know, that's what I'm saying. There's got to be a way to figure it out, Jeff. You know what I'm saying?
I know.
Anyway,
that's a good point.
So what do we got in the world of freight this week, man?
Yeah, I did. Other than Valentine's Day and the start of produce season, sort of the unofficial start of produce season is when strawberries start peaking. Plant City Strawberry Festival's coming up in a couple of weeks. So things are moving on the produce front. But I think what'll offset those gains are the Pineapple Express that's coming across the Pacific, state of emergency in California. I talked to some growers out there this week via email, and they're anticipating a similar impact on plantings and early season plantings and existing crops like oranges, onions, to last year, when that atmospheric river came through and dumped a lot of water in California. So this is a multi-day event. It'll probably, they think it'll maybe wrap up today, sometime today in California, but that's going to have a huge impact on produce season, which is not good news because that impacted volumes last year. If you recall on the show here, we talked about how they were late with their plantings and there was a lot of damage to existing crops. So similar event unfolding. The other thing I did want to share was the length of haul study I did. And it's kind of always good to do this each year just to see how long our spot market loads. And you can see a couple of things there that are kind of interesting. The flatbed one I'll get to last, because there was something that changed, and I would love to get both of you, get some feedback on that. Average. So these are spot market length of haul. Refrigerated is the longest at 935. 935 miles is a decent 2 days drive by truck with some hours left to spare to unload and reload. That's because a lot of the high volume produce that's live unload load is being hauled from remote growing produce regions that are dependent on the timing of the harvest to big capital cities on the spot market. So you see a disproportionate amount of produce moving on the spot market for reefers. It's fairly consistent though. If you look at that orange line across there, miles have dropped 5% since 2019, only 50 miles. So not a lot of change there. Dry van at 731 miles. Unlike reefer though, it's a little bit higher. And I think, Jeff, that's because during the pandemic, we moved a lot more imported retail freight across the country. Some of that appears to have stuck. And but flatbed is wild because it's more than 11% higher than 2019. But if you look in the middle of the chart, June 2021,
look at that spike.
It's really interesting. And what happened then? The volume of flatbed loads decreased, but it was sort of the market was pretty hot, leading up to that, and then things got crazy. But what drove the length of haul in that period of time? It reflects a shift in volume to the spot market in July of 2021. Yeah. And I'm not sure why, but I looked at our contract spot ratio, and in that month, so the total volume of loads started to decrease in 2021 in June, but the volume of loads moved to spot doubled. So we went from 25% of our flatbed volume on spot to 50% of total loads on spot in that July period. So there was that's almost a seismic shift. And I don't know what happened in the contract freight market. And my memory's not serving me correctly here, but I suspect there was a tightening of capacity in the contract market, and a lot more volume went to spot because the total volume of loads wasn't moving. It was that I think the contract market capacity side tightened rapidly, and for some reason there was a spike in the volume that moved to the spot market, and it's kind of stayed there ever since. I went back and checked to see if this was an anomaly in the data, as in we changed our mileage calculation. No, it hasn't, because the other two are follow fairly similar patterns throughout the course of the study here.
Yeah, let me ask you something, Dean, in regard to that. Can you calculate the number of origin points over a period of time and how much freight moved in that specific time? So was it 10 and it went to 100, or vice versa in that?
Yep, we can. Yeah, I can. I'd have to get my
because
data
I think that will tell you the tail of the tape, and then
from where
was that
yeah
geographicality.
Yep.
How to use that
geographicality.
word. Right.
Yeah.
Was it Texas?
Forgot the cop.
You know what I'm saying? Look at big areas. Was it Texas? To your point, where maybe overcapacity and the overflow went into the spot market.
I'm wondering if it also might have had something
out of there,
to do.
The volumes and all of that.
Yes, a great.
I'm wondering, Jeff, if it might have had something to also do with, you think about it, that's kind of like a year into the pandemic, and a lot of things changed after year one, right? Like companies stopped making certain products, other companies started making them. I'm wondering if that probably had a little bit to do with it too, where these flatbeds that were, moving, X to B or X to Y are now moving X to Z kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but to your point, let's just dive into this a little bit. People started moving. They weren't building homes, right? When you think about that, right? So how did that correlate with what we're seeing right now? Because obviously the more homes that are built, the more flatbed moves that are going to happen.
No, but what I'm wondering is like that same scenario, Jeff, but they moved to like machinery instead of lumber. Do you know what I mean? So they're shifting in that commodity almost. To, I mean, again, it's all speculation. But
remember the U.S. infrastructure bill that was passed, where they said that it was going to exponentially move this up. I forgot how many loads or how many trillions of dollars.
It was like 500,000 a month or something.
Wasn't it? Like ridiculous. So how did that impact what we're seeing here on that time?
So where's
next week on SalesChatter?
Next week.
Where's the Freight Sensei or Nerf? These guys, where are they? Come on, they must know the answers to these questions. The question of the week is June. What's that, Jim? Sorry,
I said questions that people want to know and have answers here on SalesChatter Live.
Yeah, and we're gonna get Dean as he's just done like a 19-hour trip from a plane to pre-record SalesChatter next week, and he's gonna be exhausted. And you know what, Jeff? We just got to create all these questions, just toss them out. Watch them
and Dean's gonna be on that plane. Go, man, I hate these guys.
I wish I was back in Australia. I could blame it on the McDonald's Wi-Fi.
Next week, I'm going to McDonald's. I don't want to be on the show.
That didn't work for me. It still worked. Hey, Jeff, I got a question for you. I was reading a LinkedIn thread, and I think it was a Jason Miller thread about the World War II era, and I think it was about reshoring or nearshoring. And you jumped into the chat with a comment about employment numbers in World War II or something. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What the heck? You're like a historian also?
No, but it was like between 1933 and 39, if I remember correctly, right after the Great Depression, and we're talking about the economy and what happened back then compared to now. And it's just true numbers, what they did back then compared to now. I mean, that's what we're looking at, all the data and how
interest rates.
Yeah, interest rates.
It was about interest rates.
It's almost like it what's that old saying? If you're not careful, history will repeat itself, right?
That's it. I think Jason said at the bottom, Mark Twain's words, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And this was the thread that you jumped into because he was talking about we've survived much worse periods of inflation in this country than we have done in the last couple of years. Well, Jeff, I thought that thread alone, I copied it and made a Word document out of it, plus all the comments, because it occurred to me that following people like Jason Miller and reading all the folks that follow is like an education lessons by a professor online. Every day.
He's a great guy. Man. I love Jason.
Fascinating.
I follow him, and I think he does this to get called out because it makes him smarter than what he is. I mean,
he's,
he just jumps right back in there and he's like, fire in the hole. It's awesome.
He'll do a post this week on the US Bank shipments index that dropped dramatically in Q4. It to a lot of us it raised eyebrows. We don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not indexed. So the US Bank shipments index, as far as I know, is a chained index. It's not indexed to 100. Back in a point in time, it's indexed. It's only indexed to the change from the previous quarter. But when you look at it, even when Jason indexed it to 100, there's something. The volume of shipments has fallen on the US Bank shipments index much faster than any of the other indices, and so it's got a bit of LTL in it too, and I don't know if that's causing it. So there'll be a thread on that out this week from Jason to try and see if there's something else that we're missing in the broader market. He's not trying to call out US Bank. What we're trying to do is make sure that all of the indices, whether it's employee hours worked, ton miles, ATA index, spot rates, they all kind of align.
All important stuff.
Yeah, they all kind of track seasonally, and this one was a little bit off in the last quarter, so hopefully we'll see something in the discussion thread from Jason on that.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. He's a good dude.
Yeah, very good. All right, well, gentlemen, that was an interesting topic. I love the fact that we got some pictures of Dean. For all y'all that are just jumping in now, that's Dean in the truck. I mean, you just look at the size of that thing. It's funny because Dean, the picture of it driving away doesn't look like it's any bigger than a normal truck, right? But when you put a human element to it, it's like, wow, crazy.
What's the GVW with that baby?
We were grossing 100,000 pounds. So that's Jeff. That's table stakes. So that your 18-wheeler is a 22-wheeler in Australia. It's shorter in length by about 10 feet, but you have about you've got 20 more thousand pounds gross. So you're higher. You're not as fast, so you can't run top end speed. But you don't want to with those weights on our roads, which aren't as good. And but I can tell you, man, 600 horsepower Cummins 18-speed gearbox. That thing boogied. And I can't tell you how it boogied faster than all the other trucks, but it was quick. You
know something, Dean, and you'll remember this. Remember when it went to Congress, I think it was, and they were talking about the possibilities of increasing the trailer weight to 55,000 pounds?
Yes. Yep.
I said, absolutely, that's bullshit, because they can't even rebuild the infrastructure of the U.S. with a bridge, with all that extra weight, the guardrails, because you got to think about that. What happens if you blow out a tire? I mean, those guardrails aren't made to handle 55,000 pounds. And to your point, so that's 85, that's 95,000 pounds gross vehicle weight.
In the Outback.
They wouldn't do it. They just can't. The roads, I mean, you'd see these things in a tar like this from that.
Yeah.
You think they're bad.
And imagine when that fills with snow, trying to get across, not a chance. Not a chance.
Oh, I know.
All right, gentlemen, time's up. We're cutting it.
Let's do this.